Every year, across Eastern Europe, more than 5,000 children are reported missing. Many are found within hours. Others vanish into silence. But what happens when the forest itself swallows a child whole, and not even time seems to want to give her back? How does a 10-year-old girl disappear in broad daylight less than a kilometer from her own home, without anyone seeing or hearing a thing? And how can a single mistake in the first hours doom an entire investigation for more than 2 decades? The answers lie in the dark soil of Turka, a remote town tucked inside Ukraine's Carpathian Mountains. And they're far more terrifying than anyone could imagine. On Saturday, September 14th, 1996, the school van dropped off its last passenger just before 3 p.m. Natalia Dobrev, a 4th-grade student, stepped off with her backpack, waved goodbye to the driver, and began her usual walk through the winding forest path. The trail, a familiar 700-meter stretch toward her family's home, cut through tall birch trees and patches of moss-covered stone. She never made it home. At 3:37 p.m., her father, Oleksandr Dobrev, called the local police station. His voice was trembling. By 4 p.m., 2 patrol officers arrived and began canvassing the area. There were no signs of a struggle. The dry dirt path showed no footprints, but Natalia's small ones, cut off abruptly halfway through. Police dogs brought in from Sambir failed to pick up a scent. The lead handler, a veteran of 19 years, said it was like she had disappeared mid-step. A bus driver named Vadim Petrenko, 42, was the last known person to see her. He told authorities he noticed a man in a dark hooded jacket near the forest entrance around 2:50 p.m., carrying a large canvas pack. The stranger didn't speak and turned away when Vadim approached. At precisely 3:20 p.m., a retired coal worker living east of the trail called in a report. He said he heard a metallic crash, like iron being dragged over rock. The sound, he said, came from deep in the forest, past the old forestry boundary. Police didn't prioritize the call, and just like that, Natalia was gone. No scream, no witness, just an empty trail and a clock ticking on the most critical hours of a child's life. The first real suspect appeared before sunset. Emil Chernak, Natalia's former stepfather, was already known to local authorities, not for violence, but for a bitter court battle over child support payments. After divorcing Natalia's mother the previous year, Emil had moved to a small workshop near Borislav, 20 kilometers away. The tension between him and the Dobrev family was common knowledge in Turka. Officers picked him up at 5:15 p.m., barely 2 hours after Natalia was reported missing. He didn't resist. He didn't flinch. Sitting under the buzz of fluorescent lights, Emil calmly handed over a receipt from a hardware shop in Drohobych, time-stamped 2:57 p.m., just 3 minutes before the school van dropped Natalia off. He even allowed a blood sample and underwent a polygraph test. No fluctuations. No signs of deceit. The receipt was verified. The distance made it impossible for him to be near the forest in Turka by 3 hours. While Emil was being processed, a second figure caught the investigator's eye. Radosh Balka, a 53-year-old hunter who lived alone in a rusted cabin 5 kilometers north of town. He was a familiar name, flagged before for firearm negligence and domestic altercations, though none had gone to trial. Locals described him as unpredictable, aggressive, and often seen dragging carcasses through the woods after dusk. A team arrived at his home after nightfall. Radosh answered the door half-drunk, hands stained with gunpowder. Inside his home, the officers seized 3 hunting rifles. One of them had what looked like dried blood on the stock. A preliminary swab was rushed to the lab in Lviv. Radosh claimed it was from a wild boar taken down near the ridge 3 days earlier. Forensics confirmed the blood belonged to a deer, Capreolus capreolus. Suspicion held, but no direct link to Natalia was found. The key detail came from a map. Radosh's last known hunting spot overlapped with an old forest snare trap, half submerged in swampy terrain. The following morning, a search dog caught a faint scent trail. It led the handlers through thick bog, then stopped suddenly beside the metal jaws of the forgotten trap. The mud was undisturbed. The air was motionless. The trail simply ended, like the child who walked into the woods and never came back. At 11:42 a.m. on the second day, an officer at the Turka precinct opened Natalia's school bag, retrieved earlier from her classroom. Hidden between two notebooks was a torn sheet of lined paper, folded 4 times. The handwriting was messy and small. Definitely not hers. Just 6 words were scrawled in pencil. "Don't go home alone. He watches." The note had no name, no date. But its placement, deliberately hidden inside her school material, implied urgency. Her teacher, Oksana Melnichuk, was called in. She insisted she'd never seen the note before. None of Natalia's classmates admitted to writing it. One boy mentioned that, a week earlier, he saw a man standing behind the fence near the school entrance. He remembered the man was tall, wore a long brown coat, and didn't speak. No one else had seen him. Detectives re-interviewed Natalia's mother, Ivana. Shaken and sleep-deprived, she admitted to something she hadn't shared before. In late July, roughly 7 weeks before the disappearance, she received a phone call around 9 p.m. The voice on the other end was male, cold, deliberate. He didn't identify himself. He simply said, "It's time your family pays what it owes." Then he hung up. She'd told no one, not even her husband. She claimed she thought it was a prank or misdial. That single sentence shifted the tone of the investigation. Bank statements were pulled. The family had no debts, no loans beyond a modest car payment. Nothing unusual. Then the call log from Ivana's landline was traced. The number led to a prepaid SIM sold at a kiosk in central Lviv, with no buyer documentation. The shop owner remembered selling several that week, but not to whom. The investigators turned to Natalia's cousin, Bohdan Primak, 22, who lived on the outskirts of Skola and occasionally helped the family with yard work. Bohdan had a known gambling habit, and whispers of loan sharks circled his name. He was brought in for questioning. Visibly nervous, he claimed he hadn't seen Natalia in over a month. His alibi placed him working at a dairy farm during the time of her disappearance. The owner of the farm confirmed it. Surveillance logs showed Bohdan clocked in and out at 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. every day that week. His access badge had been scanned, his location consistent. Another lead collapsed. And still, the girl was gone. On the 7th day after Natalia's disappearance, the newsroom of the Karpaty Vechirny newspaper received an unmarked envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of white paper. Typed, in uppercase Cyrillic letters, was a cryptic phrase: "Search where the iron hides under swamp grass." No explanation, no signature, no follow-up. The editor-in-chief handed the letter to police that afternoon. Forensic analysts examined the paper. No fingerprints, no fibers, no watermark. A thermal imprint on the adhesive indicated it had been sealed recently, but nothing else surfaced. Investigators debated its relevance. Some called it a distraction, others insisted it was a breadcrumb. Still, the terrain described was familiar. The northern edge of Turka bordered the Yalovetsky wetlands, a sprawling area of waterlogged earth, gnarled alder roots, and reeds taller than a man. That same evening, search teams redeployed toward the bogs, retracing the points where scent trails had previously vanished. But once again, the soft earth offered nothing. No clothing, no drag marks, no disturbed mud. By the 3rd week, leads thinned. Public pressure faded. The case was gradually reclassified, from active search to open cold file. In early spring of 2022, nearly 26 years later, satellite imaging surveys commissioned for a forestry redevelopment project revealed a strange depression in an isolated stretch of forest northeast of Turka. The data showed a rectangular anomaly beneath dense canopy, measuring roughly 2 by 2.5 meters, not matching any structure on official maps. Local geotechnician Luka Perovich, analyzing LiDAR imaging on his home computer, noticed the shape and flagged it to the regional inspector's office. The coordinates were relayed to law enforcement. 2 weeks later, on May 19th, a search crew accompanied by forensic specialists hiked through the forest, guided by GPS. Beneath a tangle of roots and moss, they uncovered a rusted iron hatch embedded in the soil, reinforced with bolted steel edges. Faint drag marks were etched into the surrounding rock, almost erased by time. The hatch was sealed with 2 padlocks, their hinges corroded. When the team pried it open, the air inside was stale but breathable. The chamber descended 4 steps into a cramped subterranean room. Walls lined with crumbling insulation, a single broken chair, and in the corner, the remains of a child's jacket. Sewn into the inside seam. N. Dobrev. The forensics team worked through the night. Bones lay partially buried beneath the dirt floor. Small, brittle, unmistakably human. Next to them, a tarnished metal cup, a rotted strip of cloth, and a stuffed bear so decayed it collapsed under touch. Near the back wall, a rusted pipe emerged from the ceiling, a crude ventilation shaft, sealed from the outside by a panel of bark and stone. That pipe explained what had haunted the original canine search. No scent had escaped. The remains were carefully extracted and transferred to the Lviv Regional Forensic Institute. Dental records were inconclusive. Natalia had not yet lost all her baby teeth when she vanished. But DNA pulled from the marrow matched her mother's sample with 99.9999% certainty. She had died down there, alone. Samples were taken from every surface: the metal latch, the inside of the door, the insulation, even a bent nail stuck in the wood near the entrance. On the inner face of the iron hatch, lab techs recovered a partial print and a small flake of dried skin beneath a seam in the handle. DNA extracted from the tissue produced a match. Profile Archive, XG1999707, Man A. The match stunned the review board. Man A had appeared once before, a cigarette butt found 50 meters from the Dobrev home in late 1997. It had been flagged as a possible lead, but never linked to anyone. In 2013, the sample was quietly marked irrelevant and purged from the national database. No explanation, no authorization trail. Who made that decision? Internal Affairs launched an inquiry into the erasure. A system log showed the file deletion had been executed by a now-retired technician working at the Stry data center. When contacted, he insisted he'd only followed an internal memo from a regional supervisor. No such memo was found. The case, once declared closed, was now formally reopened. Man A was no longer a ghost in a file. This time, he had left his skin behind. Using old chain of custody tags, authorities began pulling every record tied to the forestry department that operated in Turka in the autumn of 1996. On a faded roster dated October 10th of that year, a name appeared next to the supply log for the swamp region: Marek Vukovic, crew chief, Sector D4. The photograph in the forestry records showed a lean man with sunken cheeks, a crooked jawline, and eyes that seemed to avoid the camera. Marek Vukovic, born 1951, hired in 1989, promoted to sector chief in 1995. He supervised logging operations throughout the Yalovetsky marshland until his sudden death in November 2001. A fatal collision on the mountain pass outside Uzhhorod. No autopsy had been performed. The death was considered accidental, the vehicle destroyed by fire. With no living suspect to interrogate, the investigators pursued the only remaining option: exhumation. On June 2, 2022, Vukovic's body was unearthed from a public cemetery plot near Skola. The tissue had degraded, but a sample from the femur was sufficient. The lab's conclusion arrived in less than a week. The mitochondrial profile matched Man A, and the epithelial trace from the hatch. The odds of a false match, 1 in 14 quadrillion. The final question was no longer who, it was how. A reconstruction of the timeline placed Vukovic in direct access to Sector D4 during the week of Natalia's disappearance. Archival forestry logs showed no equipment deliveries between September 10th and September 20th, but a notation on September 13th indicated Vukovic had requested personal leave for hunting reconnaissance. No witnesses had ever confirmed where he went. Forensics re-examined the hatch. Along the inner edges, scrapings of tree resin matched pine glue, often used in old carpentry to fasten trunks in temporary structures. Investigators concluded Vukovic had sealed the basement door using a thick tree stump, wedged over the hatch from above. No external lock had ever been visible. They believe he intercepted Natalia less than 150 meters from the van drop-off, likely using a non-lethal method, chloroform, or a blow to the head. The chamber walls had scratch marks, some as deep as 2 centimeters, etched in desperate, jagged patterns. Bone lesions on the femur indicated a compound fracture to her leg, untreated. The medical examiner ruled that she likely died of septicemia 3 to 5 weeks after being confined. Slow, agonizing, forgotten beneath the earth while the town searched above. Vukovic had returned to the site only once, to remove the ceiling log. Investigators suspect this occurred in late 1997, when forestry patrols shifted routes and the risk of detection grew. He never spoke of what he buried, and no one had asked. In July 2022, the Dobrev family filed a civil suit against the Carpathian Forestry Directorate, accusing it of gross negligence, concealment of employee records, and indirect complicity in Natalia's death. The filing cited the Directorate's failure to vet Vukovic's criminal background, including a prior arrest in 1982 for unlawful detainment during a logging expedition near the Romanian border. That case had been closed without trial due to insufficient evidence and buried in a drawer no one reopened. The court proceedings in Lviv were swift. State lawyers argued that the Directorate bore no legal liability for the unsupervised actions of a deceased employee. They maintained that Marek Vukovic had acted alone, outside of duty, and without the institution's knowledge. After 3 closed hearings, the regional magistrate ruled in favor of the state. No appeal was granted. The ruling ignited fierce debate across Ukraine. Journalists unearthed internal communications showing that, in 1996, Vukovic had received multiple internal warnings for deviant behavior, including an incident in which a female assistant reported him for stalking. Her complaint was dismissed by a supervisor with a single note: field stress, no further action. The outcry spread across national television. Supporters of the Dobrev family gathered at the courthouse steps holding signs that read, "She was under your watch," and "Forests, remember." But the legal channels remained closed. In September, exactly 26 years after the day she vanished, Natalia's remains were returned to her family in a sealed casket. No open viewing, no eulogy, just a pine box, and a procession of neighbors walking behind it in silence. The site where she was found, 3.4 kilometers northeast of Turka, was fenced off by order of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. A plaque was installed beside the hatch. It read, "In memory of Natalia Dobrev, 1986-1996, found here, 2022. No mention of how, no mention of why. All investigative teams were disbanded. The evidence was sealed in state archives. The file was closed under Article 147. Resolved. Posthumous identification of offender. No charges were filed, no further suspects were named, and the girl who once ran home through the birch trees each day now lay under them. Permanent, undisturbed, forgotten by the system that was supposed to protect her.